I never imagined the sound of laughter could feel like knives. But that morning, standing in front of the entire marketing department at Weston and Hall, it did. My name is Marissa Clark, 34 years old, senior marketing strategist, or at least I was 5 minutes before Gregory Shaw stripped me of my title, my dignity, and the years I'd poured into that company. He didn't even lower his voice. "Pack your things, Marissa. You're done here. No explanation, no private meeting, just public execution." I remember the click of his pen as he dismissed me, the way the interns pretended to type while stealing quick glances at me, the way the fluorescent lights buzzed above like judgmental witnesses. I stood there frozen, the warmth draining from my face, my pulse roaring in my ears. My project, the Phoenix campaign, had failed spectacularly, and Greg made sure everyone believed it was my fault. But deep down, I knew it wasn't failure that burned him. It was envy. The truth was, Phoenix had been my idea from the start, a bold, rebranding concept meant to rescue a declining client. I'd spent nights sketching, rewriting, perfecting every tagline until sunrise. Greg had revised it, added his name to the deck, and pushed it to the board. When it failed under his changes, he needed someone to fall. And I was the easiest target. Security was already waiting before I could even grab my purse. "Pack it later," Greg barked. "We need your desk free by noon. You're a distraction." The room went silent except for the laughter that slipped from someone's mouth, nervous, cruel, contagious. I wanted to vanish. Instead, I stood straighter. I looked at him one last time, memorizing the smug tilt of his chin. The man I had once admired for his confidence now looked like something smaller, meaner. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mr. Ellis, the janitor, an old man with a ring of keys that jingled softly like distant wind chimes. He moved slowly, mop in hand, gray curls peeking from beneath his cap. He stopped near me, eyes kind but unreadable, and pressed a small brass key into my palm. He didn't say much, just 3 words that would change everything. "It's time, Miss Clark." Before I could ask what he meant, he walked away, humming an old tune, leaving me standing there with that key burning warm in my hand. It took me an hour to stop shaking. I wandered the building one last time, each corridor echoing with memories, the late-night brainstorming sessions, the laughter by the coffee machine, the sense of purpose I'd once had here. Now all of it felt like a set from a movie that had wrapped months ago, the actors gone, the magic gone with them. The key had a number etched on it, 12B. I remembered the 12th floor abandoned years ago after downsizing. They said it was used for storage, maybe some old equipment. No one ever went there. Maybe I should have walked away. But humiliation does strange things to a person. I needed closure, or maybe revenge. Or maybe I just needed to know why that old man thought it was time. The elevator groaned as it climbed. When the doors opened, dust greeted me like fog. The hallway smelled of paper and forgotten dreams. Room 12B sat at the end, its door stiff with neglect. The key fit perfectly. Inside, everything was silent except for the hum of the city through the windows. Old desks, broken chairs, boxes stacked to the ceiling labeled obsolete campaigns. And on one whiteboard half faded under dust, I saw my handwriting curves and loops I'd know anywhere. Phoenix Project. My pen strokes, my brainstorm bubbles. It was like a ghost of my passion staring back at me. I ran my hand over the board tears, blurring the words rebirth, transformation, fire, hope. In one corner, an old tablet sat buried under folders. I powered it on out of habit. My login still worked. And there they were, my original note sketches, voice memos, everything that proved Greg had stolen my work. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't incompetent. He had built his career on my ideas and destroyed mine to protect the lie. I sat on the floor and cried, not the quiet kind, but the raw, trembling sobs that scrape your chest. But beneath the grief, something darker took root. A slow-burning clarity. He had taken everything from me in public. I would take everything from him in silence. The next 6 months were brutal. Unemployment wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. I moved into a smaller apartment, sold my car, lived off the tiny severance they'd given me like a consolation prize. Some mornings I couldn't get out of bed. I'd replay that day over and over, asking myself what I did wrong, until I realized the real question wasn't what I did, it was what I would do next. I started freelancing. Little projects, social campaigns for small businesses. Every night I'd open that tablet again, rewriting the Phoenix concept the way it was meant to be. Cleaner, sharper, more alive. When you lose everything, you stop fearing risk. I took out every credit card I had. I emptied my savings, and I built Phoenix Rising Media, a name born from ashes, stubborn and defiant. The first months were chaos. Late nights, ramen dinners, rejection emails that blurred together. But then one afternoon, a small cosmetics company took a chance on me. I delivered them a campaign that tripled their engagement. Then another client came. Then 3 more companies that had once been loyal to Weston and Hall. Word spread fast. It wasn't luck, it was precision. I knew their weaknesses because I had built their strengths. Every client I took was one they lost. I didn't need to scream revenge. I just let results do the talking. I rented a small glass-walled office downtown, hired 2 interns, painted a mural of a fiery bird across the wall. When I stood there watching sunlight hit that mural, I thought of Mr. Ellis's quiet smile. It's time. Maybe he hadn't meant revenge. Maybe he meant resurrection. But the part of me that bled on that conference room floor wasn't done yet. Not until Greg Shaw knew what it felt like to stand where I stood, to feel the weight of every eye watching as his world crumbled. One Friday morning, 6 months to the day since my firing, my receptionist buzzed me. "They're expecting you, Ms. Clark." I smoothed my blazer, a soft gray suit tailored sharp. My heels clicked across marble floors. Every sound echoed with purpose. The boardroom door opened and I stepped into a room of polished faces and expectant smiles. Behind me, a screen lit up Phoenix Rising Media. I introduced myself to the executives of Vanguard Ventures, Weston and Hall's parent firm. They were impressed by my numbers, my strategy, my calm confidence. They offered me what I wanted most: control. And that was the beginning of the end. I signed the contract that morning with a steady hand, though my heart was a storm. Vanguard Ventures was acquiring Phoenix Rising Media. But what they didn't know was that I had already set the terms in my favor. The papers in front of them were more than a merger. They were the blueprint for a quiet takeover, a revenge that would unfold in elegance and silence, one signature at a time. When the ink dried, I wasn't just the founder of a rising firm anymore. I became the majority shareholder in a new conglomerate, Vanguard Phoenix Group. The same name that had haunted my nights now rose from the ashes like prophecy. That evening, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office, 40 floors higher than the one where Greg Shaw had humiliated me. The city lights shimmered like tiny galaxies, each one a reminder of how far I'd come. Yet beneath the pride, something restless stirred. It wasn't over. No amount of money or titles could erase the sound of that laughter in the boardroom, the sting of betrayal, the way my hands trembled as security escorted me out. Closure doesn't come from success, it comes from being seen, from truth, finally breaking the silence. Greg Shaw still sat in his corner office at Weston and Hall, drinking his overpriced coffee, probably congratulating himself for surviving his own incompetence. He didn't know the walls around him were crumbling: contracts, folding clients, defecting trust, dissolving, all orchestrated by me. But I wasn't ready for theatrics. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about spectacle. It was about precision. A month later, Weston and Hall officially filed for bankruptcy protection. The headlines were merciless: former advertising giant collapses amid client exodus. I read them over coffee, barely blinking. The world saw numbers. I saw justice. When Vanguard Phoenix Group purchased Weston and Hall's assets, no one questioned the speed of the deal. No one noticed that the quiet woman sitting at the head of the table, the one in the gray power suit, was the same distraction who'd been fired months ago. And so one ordinary Tuesday morning, I walked back through those glass doors as their new CEO. It felt like walking through a dream. The lobby smelled the same: clean floors, faint citrus polish, sterile air. But the energy was different. The whispers stopped when I entered. The same receptionist who once avoided my eyes now stood up straight, her voice trembling. "Good morning, Ms. Clark." It took everything in me not to smile too soon. I rode the elevator to the top floor, the same floor where Greg's office sat like a throne of arrogance. The doors opened, and there he was standing by the window with a cup of coffee, exactly as I remembered him. Expensive suit, smug posture, self-importance dripping from every gesture. When he turned and saw me, confusion crossed his face first, then discomfort, then disbelief. "Marissa," he asked, as if saying my name might undo the reality unfolding in front of him. "No, Mr. Shaw," I replied evenly, setting my folder on his desk. "It's Miss Clark, CEO of Vanguard Phoenix Group, effective immediately." He blinked, laughter bubbling in his throat. "This is a joke." I smiled faintly. "You laughed the same way when you fired me." His face hardened. "What are you talking about?" I slid the acquisition papers toward him. His name crossed out, his title terminated, his position redundant. He scanned the documents, his smirk fading line by line until only silence remained. "You can check with legal," I said. "It's done. I own this company now." For a moment I saw the fear flicker in his eyes. That tiny delicious second when arrogance fractures into realization. I gestured toward the door. "Security will help you out." He laughed again, hollow this time. "You think you can just walk in here and—" I didn't let him finish. "Pack later if you'd like," I said, voice calm. "We need your desk free by noon." The same words he'd said to me, and just like that the circle closed. As he stood frozen, 2 guards appeared behind him, polite, professional, and firm. I turned away, heels clicking on the marble floor like punctuation marks on a poem I'd waited months to finish. When the elevator doors closed, I exhaled. For the first time in months, I felt light. But victory, I learned, isn't always peaceful. That night, sitting alone in my office, I stared at the city below, streets glowing like veins of gold, cars moving like blood through the heart of the skyline. The power, the silence, the view, it should have felt triumphant. Yet all I felt was emptiness. Revenge gives you symmetry, not healing. I thought of the day Greg had humiliated me, the whispers, the laughter, the pity. I'd spent every waking moment chasing that image, rewriting it, perfecting the moment I would turn the tables. And now that it was over, the satisfaction was fleeting, like smoke fading into the night. But one memory lingered, the quiet one, the one no one had seen. Mr. Ellis. The janitor with the key. The man who gave me a chance to find myself again when no one else even noticed I'd fallen. I hadn't seen him since the day I was fired. I didn't even know if he still worked here, but I knew where to find him. The 12th floor was still there, untouched. The same creaking door. The same smell of dust and forgotten dreams. And there he was, mop in hand, back slightly bent, humming the same tune. When he turned and saw me, his eyes softened with recognition. "Miss Clark," he said with a small nod. "Didn't expect to see you up here again." I smiled, holding up the small brass key he had given me. "I kept it." He chuckled. "Knew you would." I stepped closer. "What made you give it to me that day?" He leaned on his mop, thinking. "You were the only one who ever saw me." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You said good morning," he replied simply. "Asked how I was doing. No one else ever did. People like you, they don't stay down for long." His words sank into me like warmth through winter. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." He waved it off. "Didn't do much. Just gave you a key." I looked around the room, the same whiteboard, the same boxes, the same dust. "No," I said softly. "You gave me a way out." He smiled, eyes glinting under the dim light. "Told you it was time." I laughed quietly. "Yes, you did." As I turned to leave, I looked back one last time. He was already mopping again, humming content. And I realized something I hadn't before. Maybe the universe doesn't send heroes in suits or speeches. Maybe sometimes it sends quiet souls with keys and kindness. That night I went home and sat by my window staring at the skyline, the same one I used to look at when I was broke, scared, and building Phoenix from nothing. The world outside didn't look different, but I did. I'd gone from being humiliated in a boardroom to owning the building where it happened. I'd risen higher than I thought possible. But the real victory wasn't Greg's downfall. It was my becoming the woman who no longer needed his validation. Still, part of me wondered what would come next. Revenge is a destination that feels like an ending, but in truth, it's only another beginning. I smiled faintly, tracing the small brass key between my fingers. Sometimes I still carry it in my pocket, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that no matter how dark the fall, there's always a door waiting to be opened, if you're brave enough to turn the key. The morning after I fired Gregory Shaw, I woke to an unfamiliar sound: silence. No alarm blaring, no anxious emails waiting, no deadlines gnawing at my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing to prove my worth to anyone. But peace, I realized, can be terrifying when you've lived too long in chaos. I made coffee and stood by my window watching the city stretch awake under a pale sky. Cars glimmered like tiny beetles. Somewhere people were hurrying to jobs that might break them the way mine once did. I wondered how many of them were smiling while swallowing humiliation, how many were hiding bruises that weren't visible. I'd won, but what did I do with victory? The first weeks after the acquisition were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and whispered gossip in the hallways. Everyone wanted to know who I really was, this quiet woman who'd appeared from nowhere, who now ran what used to be Weston and Hall. They didn't know the truth yet, not all of it. I let the whispers swirl. They said I was ruthless, that I'd manipulated the system, that I was sleeping with someone powerful at Vanguard. Let them talk. People who've never been burned will always call the survivor too cold. In private, though, I worked tirelessly. I didn't buy Weston and Hall to destroy it. I bought it to rebuild it, to cleanse the rot that had festered under Greg's leadership. The company had once been brilliant, creative, fearless, full of hungry minds who believed in storytelling. I wanted that spark back. So I did something radical. I called a meeting with every remaining employee, from interns to directors. They expected speeches. I gave them honesty. I was one of you, I told them, standing under the same fluorescent lights that once humiliated me. I worked here. I failed here. I was fired here. But I came back not to gloat, to prove that we can build something better from the ashes of what broke us. Silence. Then someone started to clap. Then another. And soon the whole room was standing. I'll never forget that sound. Applause, not for victory but for truth. That day, I renamed the company Phoenix Creative. Not just because of my own journey, but because I wanted every person who walked through those doors to remember that failure isn't the end. Sometimes it's the fire that forges you. The months that followed were the most challenging of my life. Rebuilding a company is like healing from heartbreak. It takes patience, courage, and the willingness to let go of what once defined you. Some employees left unable to adapt to the new culture. Others stayed eager to start over. I worked alongside them, not above them. I listened. I apologized for what they'd endured under Greg's rule. Slowly, trust grew like spring grass through burned soil. But even as we built something new, I couldn't escape the ghost of my past self. The woman who'd been humiliated in that boardroom, clutching her dignity like a shattered glass. Sometimes in quiet moments, I still heard Greg's voice echoing, "You're a distraction." It's strange how words can linger longer than scars. One evening, while reviewing old records, I found something that stopped me cold, a confidential file from 6 months before my firing. Inside were Greg's emails back and forth with another executive. They discussed taking credit for the Phoenix campaign, shifting blame. If it failed, even manipulating reports to make it look like my oversight caused the loss. I'd always known he framed me, but seeing it written, seeing the exact words, reopened every wound I thought I'd healed. My hands shook as I read them. The betrayal wasn't just professional. It was calculated cruelty. I thought of all the nights I'd spent doubting myself, wondering if maybe I really wasn't good enough. All the tears, the panic attacks, the way I'd stared at my resume like it was a record of my worthlessness. And he'd done it all knowingly. I closed the file and sat in silence, my heart pounding with a different kind of fury. Revenge had already been served, yes. But there was something more I needed now, not vengeance but truth. So I did what I should have done long ago. I released the documents. Not to the press, not to the board, to my employees. They deserved to know what kind of leadership they had endured, how corruption had destroyed not just a company, but the spirit of the people who worked there. When the memo went out, the reaction was explosive. Some cried, some cursed, some simply nodded, finally understanding the lies they'd lived under. And for the first time, they looked at me not as a CEO, but as one of them, someone who had bled the same way they had. 2 days later, I received an unexpected message from Greg Shaw. It was short. "Meet me, just once. No press, no lawyers, please." For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But closure, I realized, sometimes demands confrontation. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind with peeling wallpaper and coffee that tasted like burnt toast. He looked smaller than I remembered. The sharp arrogance was gone, replaced by exhaustion. His hands trembled slightly as he stirred his drink. "Marissa," he began, his voice low, "I came to apologize." I stayed silent. "I was threatened," he said quickly. "The board was cutting my bonuses, blaming me for losses." I panicked. "You were doing too well. I thought if I took your credit it might save me." I studied him. You humiliated me to protect yourself. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. I did, and I regret it every day. There was sincerity in his tone, but also the familiar undertone of self-pity, the kind that sounds like remorse but still centers itself. I don't hate you anymore, I said finally. But I don't forgive you either. He looked up, startled. Forgiveness isn't a gift for the guilty, I continued. It's a release for the wounded, and I'm not ready to release this. Not yet. He nodded slowly. I understand. As he stood to leave, I stopped him. Greg. He turned, eyes wary. Next time you destroy someone, I said quietly, remember that ashes don't disappear. Sometimes they rise. He didn't answer, just walked out into the rain, shoulders hunched, vanishing into the gray. That night, I sat by my window again, watching the storm roll over the city. The rain streaked down the glass like the tears I no longer needed to cry. Maybe revenge had brought me here. But what kept me here, what kept me alive, was something stronger. Resilience. I thought of Mr. Ellis still somewhere in that old building, mopping floors and humming his quiet tune. I made a note in my planner: find him, promote him. The world may reward arrogance, but it's built on the backs of kindness. I wasn't going to forget that again. Weeks passed. Phoenix Creative flourished. New clients, new energy, new hope. But sometimes when I'd pass the 12th floor, I'd pause and touch the old brass key on my necklace, the one I'd turned into a pendant. That key had opened more than a door. It had unlocked the version of me I was always meant to be. A year passed before I truly understood what rising meant. People think success is about money or status, the corner office, the applause, the shiny plaques on the wall. But real success? It's quieter. It's the peace that settles in your chest when you finally stop fighting ghosts. I had rebuilt everything from the ground up: the company, my confidence, my name. But what I didn't realize was that I had also built a story others began to whisper about. The woman who came back. The one who rose from humiliation to empire. It sounded almost mythical, like something out of a movie. But the truth, it wasn't magic. It was pain transformed into purpose. Phoenix Creative had grown beyond anything I imagined. What began as a tiny startup with 2 interns was now a thriving firm with 60 employees, an office that overlooked the river, and clients that once turned us away, now begging for our time. We launched a mentorship program for women who had been pushed out of the workforce, mothers, widows, those who had lost everything to toxic bosses or broken systems. I called it Project Rebirth. Every time I watched a woman walk into our office with shaking hands and walk out with her first paycheck, I felt something inside me heal. It wasn't revenge anymore, it was restoration. But even as life bloomed around me, there was still a part of my story left unfinished. A promise I had made silently to myself the day I first held that brass key. I still hadn't properly thanked Mr. Ellis. It took me weeks to find him. When I asked the HR department if he was still on staff, they told me he'd retired 6 months earlier. He didn't leave a forwarding address, just a note that said, "Tell Miss Clark I said I told you it was time." The handwriting made me smile, neat, careful, almost old-fashioned. I didn't give up. I tracked down a former employee who remembered he lived near the old district by the river, a quiet neighborhood with tiny houses and picket fences where time seemed to move slower. One afternoon I drove there. The air smelled of rain and lilacs. Children rode bicycles down cracked sidewalks. And there at the end of the street sat a small yellow house with peeling paint and wind chimes on the porch. When he opened the door, I almost cried. He looked smaller. Thinner age had deepened the lines on his face, but his eyes were the same kind, calm, knowing. Well, he said with a grin, if it isn't the lady with the key. I laughed. I was hoping you'd remember me. Remember you, Miss Clark? I've been bragging about you to every neighbor I have. He stepped aside. Come in. Inside the house was cozy, mismatched furniture, books stacked by the window, a pot of tea steaming on the table. On the wall hung a small photo of him in a janitor's uniform, smiling next to a much younger version of me I didn't even remember posing for. You kept that? I asked softly. Of course, he said. Proof I met someone special. I sat down, trying not to let the emotion spill over. You changed my life, you know. He chuckled. All I did was hand you a key. No, I said, shaking my head. You gave me faith. You saw me when I was invisible. He smiled faintly. I just saw someone fighting to keep their light on in a room full of shadows. I reached into my bag and handed him a small envelope. Inside was an embossed card with the Phoenix Creative logo and a letter of employment. "You don't have to mop floors anymore," I said. "I want you to come work with us as a facilities manager. Full benefits pension plan and an office with a window." He blinked, stunned. "Miss Clark, I'm 71 years old." I grinned. "Then you can be our legend." He laughed, shaking his head, but I could see the tears forming in his eyes. "I'll think about it," he said. "But even if I don't take it, thank you. You didn't owe me this." "I do," I said quietly. "Because you believed in me before I believed in myself." He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "You've done good, Marissa. You found your fire." I smiled. "No, you helped me light it." When I left his house that evening, the sun was setting over the river, painting the sky in gold and amber. The light hit the brass key hanging from my necklace, and for the first time I realized how symbolic it really was, not just a tool of revenge, but of awakening. The key didn't open a door to vengeance. It opened a door to who I was meant to become. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk thinking about everything that had happened, the rise, the fall, the climb back up. It was strange how the worst day of my life had turned into the beginning of something extraordinary. I pulled out my journal, something I'd stopped writing in when I was drowning in work and ambition, and I began to write again. There are moments, I wrote, when life hands you a key you don't understand. Maybe it's a loss, a betrayal, or a door slammed in your face. You think it's punishment. But sometimes it's a gift disguised as grief. I paused, tears welling up, but I kept writing. Because when you lose everything, you finally see who you are beneath it all. And when you rebuild, you don't rebuild the same way. You build stronger, sharper, wiser. I was fired in front of my whole office once. I thought it was the end of me, but it was only the beginning. The following week, Mr. Ellis accepted the position. He came to work wearing the same gentle smile and carrying his old keyring, not because he needed it, but because, as he said, old habits keep you humble. He became our quiet guardian, the heart of Phoenix Creative. The younger employees adored him. He'd walk the halls, greeting everyone, telling them stories about the days when Miss Clark ran on coffee and fury. And every time I'd pass him, he'd wink and whisper, "Still rising, huh?" And I'd answer, "Always." 6 months later, I received an invitation, a gala hosted by the National Marketing Association. The theme, Innovation Through Resilience. I didn't plan to go at first. I wasn't one for stages or cameras, but something in me whispered that maybe this was the final chapter. When I arrived, the lights were blinding, the chatter loud. My name was called, and I walked up to the podium to receive an award for Entrepreneur of the Year. The applause was thunderous. But as I looked out at the sea of faces, I didn't see the crowd. I saw that boardroom, the humiliation, the laughter, the pity. And I smiled, because I realized that every person who's ever been laughed at, every woman who's ever been underestimated, every dreamer who's ever been dismissed, they were all standing with me in spirit. I took a deep breath and said softly into the microphone, "Sometimes life burns everything you've built to the ground, not to destroy you, but to teach you how to rise." The room fell silent, then applause erupted like thunder. In that moment, I felt peace. Not the hollow kind that comes from revenge, but the full kind that comes from release. When the applause faded, I stood there for a few seconds longer, breathing in the weight of that silence. It was the kind of silence that felt sacred, the space after a storm, when the air smells of rain and renewal. I looked out over the crowd and saw faces that mirrored 1,000 different stories, people who had been broken, rebuilt, and still showed up every day. For the first time, I didn't feel like the girl who was fired in front of her whole office. I felt like the woman who had survived herself. After the ceremony, I slipped outside, away from the noise and champagne. The city glowed in gold beneath the moonlight. Cars streamed below like ribbons of light. Somewhere down there, another woman might have been crying in a stairwell, wondering if she'd ever get back up again. I wished I could tell her she would, that one day she'd thank the storm for coming. I heard footsteps behind me. It was Mr. Ellis. He was dressed in an old suit, slightly oversized, but his smile was as steady as ever. "I knew you'd end up here," he said, voice warm and teasing. "I'm still trying to believe it," I admitted. He nodded. "That's good. Belief should come slow. Makes it last longer." We stood side by side, watching the skyline flicker. I handed him the glass award, tracing the engraved words with my thumb. "Do you know what this means to me?" I asked. He shrugged. "A fancy paperweight?" I laughed softly. "It means that I survived being invisible." He tilted his head. You were never invisible, Marissa. People just refused to look. Those words hit deeper than he knew. I blinked back tears and smiled. You always know what to say. He chuckled. That's because I've had a lot of time to listen. We said goodbye that night with a hug that lingered, the kind of embrace that feels like gratitude turned into warmth. I didn't know it would be the last time I'd see him. 2 months later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small envelope wrapped in tissue. The handwriting was unmistakable. Miss Clark. If you're reading this, I've probably gone ahead to mop the stars. Don't be sad. You gave me the greatest gift, a front row seat, to watch someone rise. You were always the light in the room. Keep shining. And if you ever doubt yourself again, open the envelope. It'll remind you that you've always had the key. Your friend Ellis. My hands trembled as I unfolded the tissue. Inside was a tiny brass key identical to the one he'd given me years ago. Except this one had something new carved into it. Keep rising. I pressed it against my heart and cried for a long time. Not the broken kind of tears, the kind that washes pain clean. That night I placed both keys, the original and the new one, in a glass frame on my desk. One was rusted, marked by the past. The other gleamed with new promise. Together they told my entire story better than any award could. Months passed. Life returned to its rhythm, quieter, steadier, more rooted. Phoenix Creative continued to thrive not just as a company, but as a living symbol of transformation. We hired more women, more dreamers, more people who'd been told no too many times. And every time a new employee joined, I'd give them a tiny key-shaped pin and tell them, "This is your reminder. Every door that slams in your face is just redirecting you toward one that's meant to open." It became our motto, the key to rise. One afternoon, a young intern named Lena knocked on my door. She was trembling, holding a stack of drafts. "I think I messed up the client pitch," she stammered. "I'm sorry. I think I've ruined it." I smiled gently. "Sit down, Lena. Tell me what happened." As she spoke, I saw myself in her, the fear of failure, the desperate need to prove worth. I waited until she finished, then handed her one of the spare brass pins I kept in my drawer. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. She shook her head. "It's a reminder," I said softly, "that sometimes what feels like an ending is just the start of your rise." Her eyes welled up. She nodded, clutching the pin as if it were gold. When she left, I stared out the window again, the same skyline I had watched 1,000 times before, but now it looked different, softer, kinder. The city hadn't changed, I had. Every year on the anniversary of that terrible day, the day I was fired, I still visit the 12th floor. We never remodeled it. I kept it just as it was, dusty, imperfect, haunted by old ideas. I tell new employees it's our memory room. When they ask why, I tell them the truth. Because it reminds us where we came from. It reminds us that the ashes are part of the rise. I light a candle there each year and leave a single white lily on the floor for Mr. Ellis, for the girl I once was, for every person who's ever been told they were a distraction. That room taught me something no boardroom ever could. Sometimes the forgotten places hold the blueprints for your rebirth. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Greg hadn't fired me that day. If I'd kept my job, climbed the corporate ladder, learned to play politics instead of passion. Maybe I would have become like him, safe, respected, but hollow. Maybe the worst day of my life was really the best disguise destiny ever wore. Because losing everything forced me to find myself. Now when I speak at universities or conferences, I tell my story not as revenge, but as revelation. I tell them about the key, the storage room, the janitor who saw me when no one else did. And I tell them that every person will one day be handed their own version of that key, maybe in the form of heartbreak, humiliation, or failure. And when that happens, they'll have a choice: stay buried or rise. The audience always falls silent at that part. And I always finish with the same words: "The world will try to define you by the moment you fall. But the truth of who you are is written in the way you rise." Tonight, as I sit in my office long after everyone has gone home, I run my fingers over the 2 keys framed on the wall. The lights outside shimmer like a million second chances. I whisper a quiet thank you to the girl I used to be, to the man who tried to destroy me, and to the janitor who gave me a key instead of pity. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. The universe has a strange sense of timing. It breaks you right before you're ready to be remade. And sometimes the key to your kingdom is hidden in the ashes of your ruin. So if you ever find yourself standing where I once stood, humiliated, heartbroken, lost, remember this. The fire that burned you isn't your ending, it's your beginning. You will rise, you always will. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, your own rising, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps bring more stories of survival and redemption to life. And tell me in the comments, what was your key? Thank you for listening.